On today's show, because you haven't got enough talk about this all offseason, assessing the remaining free agents that the Padres may potentially be able to go after in a very top-heavy market that has lost a lot of the top, but there's still a lot of guys to talk about. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Wednesday, February 7th. As always, I am your host with sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiipeno. Go do that for sure. For sure. It's the one with the Florence Pugh profile icon. That's what I have at the moment. So go check that out. But also, more importantly, dare I say, go check out Locked On Padres at LO_Padres, and then go check out the YouTube as well, Locked On Padres on YouTube, if you want the video version, obviously, of your podcast, and to see my just majestic Padres jacket. Let me tell you, I mean, look at this, 1969, man. I got this for Christmas, and I love it. I love wearing this thing. For today's episode, guys, we are discussing free agents because I feel like we actually haven't talked about this a little bit, and I just wanted to do an episode more focused on some of the big ones that are remaining, whether they make sense for the team, and some under the radar guys, and maybe a couple tidbits about why I personally think that they would be interesting additions for the team. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, folks. It's exciting times, man. Let me tell you, I think that this Padres team is, it's not looking great for us, but as I discussed on yesterday's episode with the Pagoda rankings, if you want to go check that out, I think it's good that everyone's counting them out. That tends to, historically, over the past few years, work out for us. Today's episode, guys, is brought to you, though, by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers, if you join today, you'll get $200 in bonus bets for any winning $5 bet. That's right, guys. Go check it out. FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And getting started. Now, what we're going to do is this list isn't all, we're not only going to discuss players that are obviously achievable for the Padres, you know what I mean? There's some guys out there that I think, the big ones that we're going to talk about really quickly, and I just want to mention them because I also want to talk about them in a vacuum, and about whether or not they would make sense for the Padres if they didn't have some of the roster constraints that they have right now with their budget, with their financial stuff. An issue that I personally do genuinely believe will not be as bad next year. Call it a feeling, call it genuinely what I just analysis-wise what I think, but I feel like next offseason they might be a little bit more prepared to spend. Plus, because next offseason looks like it's a much better free agency class, which we will be talking about on another episode, probably next week. But for today, guys, let's start first with the number one player that is currently available, probably, in terms of position players, is Cody Bellinger. Cody Bellinger is a center fielder. He is a infamous man, dare I say, for some Padres fans, because of how much he hates us. I remember still when he had that robbery of Fernando Tatis Jr. In the playoffs back in, 2020, in the Dodgers series. That was really unfortunate. But Bellinger last year was such a revelation. And I'm a little bit higher on him than other people because I just think that he has a track record that showed that he is literally an MVP quality player. 7.8 FWAR in 2019, and then 3.5 and then 3.9 before then. He was a good player, and then he underwent one of the weirdest change in arcs that we'd seen in a player in a long time. And it's similar to someone else we're going to mention later, Noah Syndergaard, where everything started off great and then he just kind of fell apart despite being so young and so talented. And then putting together 1.4 in 2020, which was a short season in fairness. And then -1 the next year in 2021 in 95 games, and then 1.8 the year after. And then he bounced back last year with a 4.1 FWAR, 307, 356, 525 slash line, 134 WRC plus, 26 home runs, 20 stolen bases. It sounds like, this should be a guy to target. And again, I'm not as down as him as other people are. But his defense was a little bit not as amazing as it usually was. I think he was a little bit I think Trent Grisham is a little bit better than him defensively, but -3 defensive run saves, 4 outs above average. Like, he's a good fielder, and he could be even great at times. I think that's kind of what kept him afloat, especially in 2022 when he was miserable, was just that he played really good defense out in center field. Although, frankly, he could also play decent right field, by the way, but we don't need right field right now. 2019, 18 defensive runs saved and 7 outs above average. Like, he's had success there. But anyway, the big thing with Bellinger is that when you look at some of his more hardcore data, if you pull up the Baseball Savant, for example, I think that people are really nervous that this is basically a 1-year bounce back. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that if you've been like an MVP rookie of the year before who's been great and you have a bounce back, that's different than being Adam Frazier and having that 1 year that's really good, or you're Carlos Santana from last year, or you're whatever, right? Like players, Jackie Bradley Jr. is actually a better comp because Jackie Bradley Jr. had just this 1 year where he was a really good offensive player for Boston. Like, I still think he can be an effective player, but people are worried because the average exit velocity is low, his hard hit rate is still low, and the difference between his weighted on base and his expected weighted on base is so massive, showing that he might have gotten a bit lucky last year. This is more than just BABIP. Yes, his BABIP was a little bit high at 319. He's a career 285 BABIP guy, batting average on balls in play. But for me, it's the difference between the weighted on base and the expected weighted on base. 370 compared to 327. That's one of the largest discrepancies in the entire league. And if you want to look at it the other way, think about it like this. Tatis had one of the bigger discrepancies between weighted on base and expected weighted on base last year. And that's one of the reasons I expect him to bounce back. So it'd be hypocritical for me not to also say this is one of the reasons Bellinger might step back. But I still think he could be a 3.5 win player. I still think he could be a decent defender, still hit a decent amount of home runs. I just think the problem is that his market's out of control right now. And I think his agency and what have you might be looking at this and saying, this is one of the only great bats that is available, allegedly, in this free agent class. So I think that's what happened here. I think that it's just a really not great free agency class, so they're trying to seize on that. And there's been reports of $200 million is what he's seeking, which he's not going to get, by the way. So I don't feel like it's worth talking about that, because this is just how negotiations go. You know what I'm saying? Like, guys, whatever the player asks for, they're going to be crazy. And then whatever the team, although we don't get to hear about that, obviously, not nearly as much, you know what I mean? The team is probably offering like $100 million, right? So there's going to be some middle ground. That's how these things work out. I think that Bellinger, in theory, in a vacuum, I still wouldn't want the Padres to go after him, even if they didn't have their budget constraints. And this isn't just purely based on what I mentioned with some of his numbers and how he's expected to regress next year. For me, it's that I just don't want to be giving out these big contracts right now. The Padres already have the Tatis, Musgrove, Cronenworth, Bogarts, Machado things to deal with. I just think that they should be chilling on big contracts, and instead, if you were going to do that, you should wait until next year. And I'm saying this as if pretend for a second that the Padres don't have some of these big players. I just don't think that it's worth the risk that you're overpaying for someone who might just be Kevin Kiermaier level. You know what I mean? Except that it's you're going on the offensive side of things. I don't know. He worries me. He worries me because I think that they're trying to parlay his past resume with what he did last year and ignore everything in the middle. And especially considering the weighted on base and the hard hit rate, that would worry me. I'm really curious to see who gets him. I've predicted the Rockies because I think he's just the perfect Rockies player. They love name value. They love that he won an MVP a while ago. They just did this with Chris Bryant. They shouldn't be spending big, but they tend to anyway. So I think Bellinger might be someone that they go after. I would not be interested in him, but I can't wait to see where he goes. And I'm still somewhat bullish on him for at least being a solid player. I just don't think the price matches, and I think that it's going to be an overpay. It just sounds like some team's going to be desperate for a center fielder, especially with Kiermaier gone. That I think that's what's going to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, I just spent way too much time discussing Cody Bellinger. This is what happens on this podcast. I talk a little bit too much on some players, but I want to talk about one more big fish that everybody knows about that we must discuss, and then a lot of the more under the radar free agents that I think that could make sense for the Padres potentially. So, guys, let's get into that in just a second. First, I got to talk to you. Look, it's big game week, ladies and gentlemen. It's big game week. Happy Super Bowl week, Super Bowl Sunday, if you happen to be listening to this on a Sunday for some reason, to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday, man, it's about getting cozy. You know what I mean? Maybe putting on your team jacket, whatever. Maybe getting a little Nintendo Switch or one video game on the side, just in case, to be occupied. You know what I mean? And then getting some great snacks, getting the best seats, being comfy, and then voila, football. And also placing some bets. There's always opportunities for a bunch of different bets for the Super Bowl. They've got crazy prop bets. They've got crazy, like the Gatorade stuff, the how long will the national anthem go, what songs will Usher perform. They've got all those type of prop bets, but they've also got your usual stuff with which players will score a touchdown, how many points are going to be scored, spreads, more over-unders on receiving yards and whatnot. Me personally, I'm all in on the Isaiah Pacheco stuff and Christian McCaffrey. Either one of those guys, I think that we might get some good running game. We're due for a good running game, performance in the Super Bowl. I don't know. I'm not the best at analyzing football, but that's just me. I feel like we're really due for a great running back performance in the Super Bowl. Hopefully it's Isaiah Pacheco, because he's the Puerto Rican legend. But everybody, new customers, remember, join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to sign up. FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. And just like that, we are back, ladies and gentlemen, here on the Locked On Padres podcast. Let's continue, because we talked a little bit too much on Bellinger, but I just wanted to give my full thoughts on him because it is a position that the Padres need. And some of you that are listening or watching might be like, well, let's go get, the best. I mean, that's what we've been doing for the past few years. I just don't think that it's attainable at the moment. And I think Preller's smart because there have been reports and rumors that Preller and company have been like, this market needs to calm down. You know what I mean? So that they're like, let's just calm down. This is getting out of control. It feels very much like it's a best available. So a lot of guys are trying to get paid. Obviously, some players like Ohtani are an exception. I still think that there are good players in this free agency class, but those top ones, you shouldn't be shelling out for, at least in my opinion. Next one to discuss. Speaking of top level players, Blake Snell. I've talked about him a lot, and he still hasn't been signed. And one thing that I find interesting is that it seems like based off of vibes that he would really love to go to the Mariners, but that doesn't make sense to me because the Mariners already have a lot of pitchers. They already had the Robbie Ray thing where they had just paid a guy coming off of Cy Young despite some questionable peripherals, and they don't need that. They need bats. That team is like 5 deep. Like the best pitching staff in baseball for my money. Only the Dodgers could potentially match it. And the Dodgers, it will depend on some things like Walker Buehler's health, how quickly Yamamoto, acclimates himself to Major League Baseball. So that'll matter. But for me, I mean, the Mariners are just stacked there. So I don't see that as an option. I think I have a fear in a world where Snell, and I'm not blaming him for this, just cashes out and gets like a huge overpay from a team like the Angels. I would watch the Angels because the Angels are the type of team where, one, he wouldn't have to like move very far. And also congrats to Blake on becoming a dad soon, by the way. I saw that on Instagram. Shouts to our guy. Congrats, my dude. I think that there's a potential that the Angels are like, all right, we just lost our big franchise guy. Let's be desperate and go sign Blake Snell. Never rule stuff like that out. Same thing goes for the Rockies, right? Like teams of that nature, right? Where they're like just desperate and they want someone. I could see that. I will say it has been weird, the lack of traction. And the fact that the Padres were at one point mentioned to be rumored to be in talks with him speaks to me a little bit. Maybe Preller is hoping that the market goes down. Maybe he's looking at this and saying, Robbie Ray got paid a whole lot. Let's like not do that. And let's hope that teams are also feeling the same way and the price goes down. Either way, I still don't see it. I still think there's going to be a team out there that decides, this guy won a Cy Young, and at his best, he's one of the elite pitchers in the league. At his worst, that could get bad. This is a guy that really depends on getting a lot of strikeouts to offset his walk rate and his inefficiency. And how will that age as he gets older is really scary. Like this guy might become, a Syndergaard in a few years. Like that's not impossible for him, or something even worse that I can't think of right now. Like Robbie Ray when he was bad on the Diamondbacks, right? Like there's the potential that happens. I think that's what scares people with his historic walk rate. So I see that. I think there's a slight chance. I don't think the Padres should do it either, though. I think that the Padres should chill. I really do. I think these long-term big budget contracts, they should chill on and instead look forward to next year. If you're trigger happy Padres fans and you really want a big contract sign, look at next year's class. I think there's a lot more there. There's a lot more to choose from, so you won't be forced to go after only a plan A or plan B. And I think that there are other teams that need it. And I think that the Padres should say, you know what? Yes, we like we would like our chances with Snell back. But my thing is, let's count on some prospects. You've got 3 top level, pitching prospects in Thorpe, Snelling, and Lesko. And one of them may come up this year, but one of them might be awesome immediately. You got Michael King back. I just don't think you need to do that because then you have Musgrove, Darvish, and Snell all signed long term. That's just a little risky to me, given all their budget constraints. I don't want to make it that they do this and then they're basically unable to make any moves going forward for pitching. I'd rather just test and see what happens. You know what I mean? And then look forward to next year. Hey, maybe a reunion with Max Fried next year. I wouldn't be against it. So that's not something I see happening, but I cannot wait to see who he signs for. Now let's get into the under the radar guys. Gary Sanchez. Gary Sanchez is a player that I thought would have been an interesting re-sign for the Pods because the combo of him and Luis Campusano was one of the most shockingly amazing things in baseball last year. Gary being pretty competent behind the dish, catching for guys like Snell, and then hitting for a lot of power to offset the fact that he doesn't walk and he strikes out a lot. Like being a really effective catcher, especially when you look at what catchers usually produce. He was like a borderline top 10 catcher last year in very limited time. But it was a limited time, and he does have a greater track record of not being so good. So I don't know if I would have been super in on signing him in the first place when there are other areas that they need to fill out more. And instead, they got Kyle Higashioka, who I think is a capable veteran that will be there, maybe help out Campusano, get better a little bit defensively, as he is going to be the main catcher. Campy, obviously. And he's going to be a beast. So I think that made more and more sense. To get Higashioka was like a nice little treat, and those things matter. I like that we'll have a competent backup. I think that's good because that's been one of the problems with the Padres past few years is that they had no backup and then they also hated Campusano for some reason. So no on Gary Sanchez, and I don't think that they will anyway. Another one. Let's look at first base. So first base doesn't have a lot anymore. Rhys Hoskins signed, and I thought that there was a dream scenario. I talked about 2 dream scenarios this offseason, if people remember. Number 1 was Jung-Ho Lee. I thought that was the number 1, if we get a big fish, it will be this guy, playing center, good arm, really good bat-to-ball skills, like that might translate immediately. Sounded like it, but instead the Giants said, we need a guy for once, so we're willing to overpay. Like, I know everyone's been making fun of them for that, but who cares? Like, you got a good player, and they just haven't been able to spend lately, so they need to start getting some talent over there, so they decided to overpay, and I think that made sense. And the other one was, potentially, if you could find a way to move Jake Cronenworth off first base in whatever way, whether it be trade, whether it be trading Ha-Seong Kim, whatever it was, and then you sign Rhys Hoskins to some prove-it deal, for a couple years, that guy has been a really big power source for a while. A little bit streaky, but nice power source. He was also a dream scenario. But instead, he signed with my arch nemesis, the Brewers, 2-year deal, worth, what was it, $30 million, I think? Let me say. $34 million. Interesting move for the Brewers considering that they're now tanking and that they had just traded Corbin Burns. So very, very interesting stuff going on in Milwaukee. So I think that Hoskins would have been my number 2 dream scenario for this offseason. Not going to happen. Obviously, Jung-Ho Lee didn't happen. But hey, it's fun to dream. The one that might be possible is Brandon Belt. I'm not in on it, though, because Brandon Belt is a just giant walking infirmary, and it always scares me. And I don't want to be in a world where the Padres trade off of Ha-Seong Kim to get Jake Cronenworth back in the infield, just to be in a situation where this guy isn't going to be healthy for most of the year. And frankly, I think that last year might have been like that last hurrah kind of year. He played 103 games. He was a little bit more of a utility guy. Don't get me wrong. I would still like the guy as a hitter if you could potentially get him. But really large spike in strikeout rate, which I didn't love. Still had a 138 WRC+, but he's 35. Here are his games played over the past few years. 103, 78, 97, 51, 156, 112, 104. This guy just misses time. And to me, last year was one of those, that was it. That was the last ounce of really great baseball in him. So I wouldn't necessarily love him. If you could get him as a DH, sure. But considering all the stuff with Machado, I just don't know exactly what will happen there. And with the glut that they have in the infield. Wouldn't hate it. one to keep an eye on. I wouldn't hate it, but again, doesn't it just sound like this guy's going to get hurt again? Right, guys? Like, doesn't it just feel like he's going to get hurt one way or the other? I mean, even in the great year in 2021, he managed to get hurt. So that's my thing. Can you keep him off the infirmary? Sure, but I don't see that for the Padres right now. They need something a little bit more steady, which could be a bunch of other people. You know, Garrett Cooper was pretty good last year, but again, I think that this would be more of a DH situation. I don't think any of the guys that are available are dudes that you'd be playing there full time, except for maybe. Let me see here. No, that's it. Yeah, what am I saying? It's just not going to happen. So I don't see anyone here that makes sense at first base. It'd probably have to be someone you acquire in a trade, or potentially if there's some outfielder who could play first base, whatever. I don't know, but I don't really see any first baseman that makes sense. Jurickson Profar. Let's get into the outfield, baby. Jurickson Profar could play left, and you know why he could play left? Because he played it already for us. He's been there before. He's a vibes guy. I will say, though, if we're just talking strictly not vibes, although he tends to do pretty good with the Padres, for some reason, he tends to be this guy that I weirdly trust to get big hits. I don't know if this is just a feeling thing, but it's true. And he also would probably not cost anything, which is the big plus for him. And maybe he's cool here. Hey, every now and then signing like a bench player that just seems to have a good vibe to him, seems to be good in the clubhouse, gets along with Tatis. That's not the worst idea in the world. But that being said, was atrocious last year. -2 F4. And that was with the Rockies, primarily, by the way. Like, this is a dude who, now granted, he came into the season late. He didn't sign with a team for a long time, despite having his best season the year before with the Pods, 2.6 F4, 111 WRC+. I think everyone knew it was a little bit fluky and just not... He doesn't do anything particularly great, which is the problem. And I think that there are other people on this list that at least you could point to one thing that they do great. And I don't think Jurickson Profar has that. I think that's his problem. But would I hate him on some mini deal? No, I think it would be a lot. It would make a lot of sense. And it would be, you know, a little bit of a culture guy who you can bring in that you know will not play full time. And then you can test out your Jacob Marcy's, your Jackson Merrills, your Graham Pauly's, whoever. We'll see how spring training develops and goes along. You see how those guys do. And then if it's like they're not everyday players yet, whatever, it's nice to just have a trusty vet in your back pocket that, for whatever reason, seems to do better with the Padres. But I would also understand saying, man, he was bad last year. Because, man, he was bad last year. Oh, my God. -2 F4, guys, is freaking hard. And again, he was hitting it in Colorado. I know he signs late. Maybe that's the best case scenario for Profar, is that, like, he signed so late that it threw him off, a la Steven Drew of the Yankees a while back, right? Like, he was infamous for, like, he missed, like, basically all of spring training and got to the league and he just couldn't hit. So that was one. But hey, what do I know? We're going to continue talking about some possible free agents and some guys that I think could be interesting for the Padres, including some actually realistic starting pitching targets, some very interesting ones. And then, ladies and gentlemen, we will wind down. But first, a few messages from our sponsors. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen, here on the Locked On Padres podcast. Vibing and thriving, some would say. And I hope you all are vibing and thriving as well. Let's keep talking. Let's keep talking, folks, about these free agents. Jurickson Profar was one. The next one that I want to pitch or talk about, let's talk about this guy first, really quickly. Tommy Pham. First of all, it would be hilarious if he came back, so I don't see that. It would be weird. It just feels like it's just in general rare. But 35 years old, also low-key just had a good year last year. But he gives me Brandon Belt vibes, where it's like that might have been it. You know, 110 WRC+, 1.8 F4. He doesn't do anything for you defensively. And he's just, I just don't see it. And I don't think that it worked here for whatever reason for Tommy Pham. He's been a good player before, don't get me wrong. But again, I just don't see it. I don't think that this is a guy that they should sign. And for whatever reason, just the vibes were bad when he was here. But that being said, decent, you know, good approach at the plate. And if you have to put someone out there, Pham would be good. But I just don't think that we're retreading those waters. It's just not how it works. But instead, one that I do want to retread is someone that I've been interested in forever, it feels like. And that is my boy, Robbie Grossman, ladies and gentlemen. I have been a Robbie Grossman truther for the longest time. And here's my thinking. Here's my thinking. Robbie Grossman, for better or worse, is basically going to cost nothing. And for me, this would be similar to Jurickson Profar. But unlike Jurickson Profar, he's not coming off of a negative F4 season where he couldn't even manage to hit well in Colorado, one of the easiest ballparks to hit in Major League Baseball. Robbie Grossman, the one thing that he has, unlike a Profar as well, who I just mentioned, he doesn't do anything particularly well. He's like okay in a bunch of other areas, right? Like he has modest power. He's a modest switch hitter. He can occasionally field well if he's in the mood or whatever, get you some outfield assists, but he's just not great in a lot of areas. Robbie Grossman, 0.4 F4 last year. Not a good defensive player, which is one problem. If he were to play in left field, if you just look at some of his defensive numbers last year, he had -3 defensive runs saved and -3 outs above average. So that's not great. That's not great. But the one thing he does is he walks. And he had a decent WRC plus last year, 102. He doesn't hit for a lot of power, but he hits for the same, if not a little bit more, than Jurickson Profar. And I don't think he'd cost anything. And the number one thing is that he has great plate discipline. He's in the 100 percentile in chase rate in all of Major League Baseball. Like, he's up there with Soto when it comes to that. So if you're going to just have someone as like this bench depth option, so that way you're not entirely reliant on Marcy, Merrill, and Paulie potentially breaking out and being good outfielders for you, because they're going to need two, right? We need two outfielders. So instead, get Robbie Grossman, who's at least has some experience there, and he's going to get walks. Now, I know that getting walks isn't always the Padres' biggest issue. I think that they've been really inconsistent when it comes to what the heck works for them. You know, it used to be that they desperately needed walks, 2019 being one of them, and that's why they got Grisham and Tommy Pham. I don't think that's necessarily the thing with this team. They just need a little bit of pop, and they just need fundamentally to drive runs in. And I don't think that Robbie Grossman can necessarily do that anymore. But again, you could do a lot worse, and there's one thing he's good at, which is plate discipline. Every year, having a high on-base percentage, 340 last year, and aside from the 310 before that, 350, 340, 334, 367, 361. Like, this is an on-base machine guy, and I just don't think he'll cost anything. Nice lefty bat. I would be a fan. I'd be a fan, and the fact that he can be, like I said, a lefty, I think could be really effective. I do. So again, that's just an option. That way you have that, and then you just don't have to be only starting young guys for the rest of the time. Another one is Michael Taylor, who I think is like a little bit of the anti Tommy Pham. Dennis Lynn actually discussed him a little bit in the recent mailbag, saying like, is there a possibility of a Michael Taylor being that center fielder and whatnot? And he was like, never rule out the Padres for anything, but it doesn't seem like that's entirely in the cards. He's an excellent fielder though. So unlike the two of the players I mentioned, it's kind of like guaranteed that we know what we're going to get from Michael Taylor. 32 years old, but really good, outs above average in the 94th percentile. He's got good arm strength. He's fast, and he does barrel the ball a decent amount. So like, he might like stumble into some home runs every now and then, which is one thing that's always funny about him. He might stumble into some, and last year he wasn't too bad. Another thing that I want to mention though, really quickly, in terms of run value, also, what's his face? Robbie Grossman kills fastballs. Well, I don't know if Michael Taylor's necessarily great at any one of those things, but would I hate it? No. And you would definitely get some good defense, and he would just be one of those players you could take out there, plug in, and be like, all right, you're at least going to be a good defender. The problem is the WRC plus 90. He hasn't had above 100 since 2017. So again, between him and Grossman, that's where I'm at, where it's like, choose which type of thing you want to go for. 1.7 F4 from Michael Taylor last year, not too bad. The problem is that bat's going to make you want to jump into the Atlantic Ocean. And I know he stumbled into 21 home runs last year. If he's able to do that again, that would be great, but I just don't see it. So again, Michael A. Taylor, definitely an option for the Padres. Might cost a little bit more than Robbie Grossman. And I also don't know how much of that is him having to start. You know what I mean? How much of that F4 is the fact that he was just starting all the time. You know what I mean? For some really crummy teams. But we'll see. We'll see. What do I know? Next player, when it comes to DH, the last bat I want to talk... Oh, no, two more bats. My apologies. Adam Duvall is another one. I mentioned this guy a while ago when talking about free agents. Interesting. And he's actually had some decent success in the outfield at points throughout his career. In terms of left field, though, he has been, if I'm not mistaken, it's been a little bit since he's played there. Let me just check really quickly on Fangraphs if it would load, by the way. Anyone having trouble with Fangraphs lately? It hasn't been loading for me. But last year, in 34 innings, 1 defensive run save, 0 outs above average. But the last time he was playing before then, he's had some years where he's been really effective. His best seasons defensively have come in left field. So that would make a lot of sense, right? Really underrated defender at times. 116 WRC plus, 1.9 F4, 21 home runs last year. That's a winner. That's the type of player that if you want to bring in someone, he's actually, forget Robbie Grossman. It's like Michael A. Taylor or Adam Duvall are 2 guys that make a lot of sense for being able to lock down these positions and at least be just guys that give you some reassurance. And I think that's important for the Padres. And also Duvall, I wouldn't be shocked if he could have some value if, say, one of the outfielders, if, say, a trade happens or what have you, where he could move to the DH spot, especially after Machado hops off that, and be pretty decently effective. Like, again, 21 home runs last year and has had some really underrated seasons, particularly with defense. So I wouldn't hate Adam Duvall. I think him and Michael Taylor and Robbie Grossman should be the top targets, but especially with Taylor and especially with Adam Duvall, because I think Duvall actually could hit a little bit, and that's great. He will be maddening at times, but he'll go on a stretch where he just hits like 4 home runs in a week and just carries the offense, and I kind of like that if we're talking about just taking flyers on people. He's pretty steady with that bat. He only had basically like 1 year in the past 5 where he was below average, and that was 2022. So again, I would be a fan of Adam Duvall big time in left field. I think that would make a lot of sense, and I think the defense is legit. I think he could be effective there. Last couple guys to talk about. Noah Syndergaard. Name value only, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, he's only 30 years old, and yes, you could talk yourself into Ruben Niebla figuring him out, but this guy it's just gone. It's been gone for a long time, and I might have been more interested in him if his strikeout rate hadn't gone down 2 years in a row, right? Because it was weird. His strikeout rate before then, before last year, let me just pull it up really quickly. More batted ball, where are we at? His strikeout rate in 2022 was 16.8%. That was down from the 25% he had with the Mets his last year with the Mets. And it's not like he was awesome for the Mets that year either, by the way. In 2021, he was not very good. But he was really lucky, I think, in 2022. And then 2023, you saw the luck not pan out, right? 6.5 ERA, 6.52 expected. Nothing about this was fluky. Negative 0.5 F4. Just not great. If the strikeout rate hadn't gone down again, I might have been more interested, but it did, and that offsets anything that's interesting about him walking less batters this past year. Like, it's just, my God. You know what I mean? Like, this guy is just not, it's gone. And I think that it's really sad, and I just want to take a second to be like, I think that's what's so sad about Syndergaard is the fact that he's only 30 shows that he had talent for him to have been called up so early, and he did. He was really freaking good for like a while. Like, his first year with the Mets, he was awesome. His second year with the Mets, he was worth 6 F4, guys. Like, this guy was an absolute monster. And then the year after, he has the Tommy John and whatnot. And then the year after that, he comes back and is really effective. In 2019, he's really effective, and then it's just gone. And maybe this is injuries, maybe it is. Don't be tempted by this. Another thing is that he only pitched 88 innings last year. He's been always a health concern. I'd rather, if I'm going to take a flyer on someone who I know is going to at least pitch some more innings. And for me, a good example of that is the last guy of the podcast, Michael Lorenzen, one of the last big free agents. If the Padres want to go down this route, I don't know. I think Michael Lorenzen might actually get paid a little bit more than what would be comfortable than I think someone like Syndergaard would get, someone like these. I'm not saying he's, going to get Blake Snell money, but Lorenzen, teams love that he threw that no-hitter last year. You know what I mean? They love that he pitched 153 innings. I do too. I will say one thing that I do like about him is that in 2022, one of the things that he was really good at was his slider, which opponents hit 67 against, but he only threw it 4.4% of the time. He increased that usage to 23% of the time, and hitters only hit 242 against it. Like, they got a little bit better and whatnot, but the fact that they don't kill his primary pitches is nice. Four-seam fastball, only 211. Slider, like I said, 245 or 242. Changeup at 186. It's his sinker and his sweeper and his curveball that get lit up sometimes, but thankfully he doesn't pitch them too much. Is it possible this pitch mix can be improved even more under Ruben Niebla? Maybe, but I wouldn't be looking at this guy being a stud. I think that he gets decent amount of chases, not a lot of strikeouts though. and the ground ball rate is, steady, even if down from 2022. So the only thing about him is pitched 153 innings. I like that. He could be an innings eater. And then more importantly, what I just mentioned about that, I like that he made some significant changes to his repertoire, and that resulted in good results. That usually sounds like a guy who might have room to grow, at least in my opinion. But again, low fours ERA guy. Could you get that for nothing? Maybe. I don't think you can, though. And I think that the Padres might really be in a roster constraint thing. I think this guy gets maybe a 3-year deal somewhere. I just feel like people are desperate for pitching. They're always desperate for pitching. And everyone's going to say, oh, he was there for Philly and he threw the no-hitter for them right after the deadline, right? This is a big game player, all that stuff. I could see him getting overpaid a little bit. That's just me. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's kind of the last one in terms of notable free agents. So I think for me, out of all of these guys that I talked about, my absolute favorite is Adam Duvall, because of the defense, because of the power, and just I really like the idea of Adam Duvall. It doesn't have to be an everyday player. And when Manny comes back, you can move him to DH, and I think that's a decent DH, not great, but decent, and plays decent defense. Will have those moments when he's really streaky and he will carry your offense for a couple weeks. I like that. I like that out of flyer players that aren't going to play full time, and they could just be ride the hot hand sort of thing. And that really can amount to something over the course of a season. And then it gives you more wiggle room where it's okay, now we just need to figure out center. And we've got plenty of guys that can fill that, and we'll have our prospects up and whatnot. Give Merrill center field, whatever position he's most comfortable with, whatever position any of those guys with Marcy and Paulie are comfortable with. And then you have someone in left field who's just an established vet that I don't think is going to fall off a cliff or anything. Even if the 21 home runs last year, probably shouldn't 100% expect that to happen again. But even still, I just think that he's a solid guy to add to this team that I don't think will cost too much. Although, again, both him and Michael A. Taylor, they do have the F4 thing. I think teams will be more interested. So if you can't go that route and even they become a little bit out of your price range, then I still like Robbie Grossman, because at the very minimum, the guy has good plate discipline and he can get walks. So that's just me. But hopefully you all enjoyed today's episode, the latest check-in on the free agent market, folks. You got to do it every now and then, because guess what? There's still free agency out here. There's still deals. Clayton Kershaw just got signed yesterday. I can't wait for him to choke again. That should be a lot of fun. He said, I got one more in me, So I'm looking forward to that. We will be covering, guys, all sorts of Padres topics as the rest of the week goes on. Tomorrow, we're finally going to be talking about Ha-Seong Kim and why I think the Padres need to trade him. Going to be talking about that, discussing some potential teams that might make sense, because it is their biggest asset, essentially, that they have right now, aside from prospects, and then they can't really deal from prospects right now because of the budget and whatnot. So, that's where we're at, ladies and gentlemen. But until next time, stay safe, and of course, stay faithful, my fire faithful homies. Take care.